I'm Corrie Miller. I work for Friends of the Mad River, and I know some of you are super familiar with Friends of the Mad River. We've been around for nearly 3 decades, but others of you may not be. So for the sake of saying it, our mission is to steward the healthy land and the clean water of the Mad River watershed for the community now and into the future. We do that in lots of ways. We bring people together basically to learn about the place, to conserve the resources that we have, and to celebrate this wonderful place that we all live or we visit. And I hope that tonight we're going to be doing a little bit of the learning, a little bit of the conserving, and a lot of the celebrating. And thank you for being here for that. What I wanted to talk about for just a second before we focus on the Ridge to River program that we've been working with for the last 2.5 years, I want to talk about the Mad River Watch program and just acknowledge some folks who are in the room who've done a lot of volunteering in support of that program. It's probably the program you've heard of that Friends of the Mad River does. We think it's the longest running volunteer-based water quality monitoring program in the nation. We go out to dozens of sites every summer, 6 times a summer, and test the water. We test for E. coli, phosphorus, nitrogen, and turbidity. And essentially it gives us a sense of the health of the water, which gives us a sense of how well we're doing as stewards of the landscape. So this program wouldn't happen without the pretty much major dedication of these volunteers. And I'm going to call their name and just ask them to stand if they're in the room, and just stay standing. Okay, indulge me, folks. Charlie Baldwin, I know you're here. Yay! So why don't we hold applause until the end. Sally Boudreau, Richard Chaplinsky, and Kenny Perot, and Susie Dean, I think, was here, but may no longer be. Annie and Hazel McMillan, Fran and Gary Pliwek, Suzanne and George Schaefer, and Mike Ware. I saw Mike. Yay. All right, and Paula Baldwin, who is the lab. Oh, and Annie and Jewel Offender, who I forgot to put on the list. I knew this would happen. They're right here. They're great. All right, thank you, everyone. So they get up in the morning very early and go out no matter the weather, and they're tireless and dedicated, and they're the soul of that program. So thank you all. I think many of you have perhaps already received the tote that we have. What's special about this tote that we have for all of the volunteers is that it's the very first swag that we have printed with our new logo, and it's very exciting to us. So thank you all, volunteers. All right, so now I would like to welcome Roger Hill. Some of you may know who Roger is, and I'm going to just do a very brief introduction by telling you a story that happened recently. One of my colleagues had found out that it was time for Roger Hill to come to this event, and she said that she had a friend in Texas who had experienced Hurricane Harvey and was saying after Harvey, how come we didn't know that was coming? How come we didn't have any clue that that was going to be such a bad storm? And her response to her friend was, well, I knew because Roger Hill told us it was happening. So, without further ado, welcome Roger. Thank you. Thanks.
I'm just going to stick that right there. Does anybody mind if I'm drinking my All right. What I'm going to do is quickly change the program here and get my slideshow up. And hold on 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to have to stand close to about right here, and I'm going to try to stay put. And hopefully I'm not going to feedback too much here. Testing 1, 2. So I'm going to talk, I have about 40 slides that I'm going to have to go pretty fast here. I have about 20 to 25 minutes, I guess, for about a 5-minute questions and answer after this. So I'm going to go pretty fast. Yes? Can't hear me. Okay, I'm going to talk fairly loud, which is not a problem for me. Check 1, 2. You hear me okay now? Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to talk real quickly about a couple of things that we have here. It's relatively brief presentation is going to be on observed projected trends. Increasing trends in catastrophic weather, which we're seeing. I think you'd really have to be kind of out of touch to figure out, you know, that it's not happening, I guess. Everybody can see the catastrophic weather we're having, and the hurricanes are just an example of that recently. In fact, I'm going to touch on that just a little bit. And we'll talk about the variability of out-of-season weather, and I think that's probably the folks here, the Friends of the Mad River, with riverbanks and erosions and this kind of thing, and how crazy the weather has been. Everybody knows, for example, that we had like about a foot of rain to start in spring, and since then we've had kind of almost drought conditions with that slow kind of transition through the summer. So we had a kind of a super wet spring the first half of summer. We had a lot of thunderstorm activity, and then we had very dry conditions that kind of set up in August, and it trended into definitely September and October. And we're seeing kind of, well, we've broken some records, so this is extreme weather, and this is summer-like weather, basically in fall, and is a good example of the kind of out-of-season weather I'm talking about. So observed trends, I'm looking at, if you can see this here, basically we have a lot of lines here. The squiggly lines, the reddish line is associated with air temperature over land. And you can see that it's going up. This is from 1860 to about 2000. And basically what's happening is, I'm going to see if I can walk back just a little bit. There we go. And the air temperature is over the ocean at night. And then we have just plain old sea surface temperatures. You can also basically see that it's relatively close, with the red line coming in a little bit faster right now. But this again, 1860 to 2000, so our temperatures are obviously, they're fluctuating to some degree, but they're also going upward. So I took this just today just to show you, I'm going to focus a little bit on the oceans, because this is the area that, the places that are seeing the biggest warming that are taking place right now are in the poles, the South and the North Pole. Mostly the Arctic and the North has been seeing a lot of increase in temperature, about 2 to 3 times as fast as the warming that we're seeing here at 45 north latitude. Well, but the other thing is the oceans are really warming up, and we're talking about hurricanes, and the hurricanes are obviously, they work off latent heat of the oceans, and we have very warm sea surface temperatures. So you might notice here all this red in the oceans are above normal sea surface temperatures, temperature anomalies. The picture here, this particular graphic, just shows what the temperatures are. Yeah, it's cold off Greenland. Yeah, it's cold in the North Pacific, the North Atlantic, as to be expected. In fact, it's cold right now. But if you put all the temperatures together and you use a baseline, roughly 1970, I forget what this is now, the baseline here. It goes back some time, and then you compare notes to see where the temperatures are. Our temperatures are warming. Our climate is definitely shifting. So ocean warming. It's interesting to note that the temperatures, the ocean heating that's taking place is gigantic compared to the land and the atmosphere and ice heating. Look at this. It's basically 93%. So all of climate change, the warming factor from carbon dioxide and methane and greenhouse gases, is really going into the oceans. And this is where we're watching everything. And of course, if we have a flow coming in off the oceans, it usually means very heavy precipitation. And indeed, this is what's going on. A good example of that, we're talking hurricanes, that was Irma. Irma has this is not Maria that hit Puerto Rico, but hit northern Cuba and of course went into Florida. At the same time, we had another area of low pressure, a tropical cyclone that developed, and it was only good for about 2 or 3 days, and it was Katia. And then Katia kind of died their death very quickly with basically the conditions that were falling apart. But that was followed by, of course, Maria. We had Jose that was kind of spinning off to the south and east of the region. And it was quite interesting to see all the hurricanes that spinning up very quickly. One of the things that we've seen was the Category 4 and 5 storms are increasing according to a lot of studies out of MIT. So this is the 2017 hurricane track, top 10 busiest seasons. That was as of September 30th. I think it's still basically, that's validated. And you can see some of these tracks, but we had a lot of landfalling hurricanes this time around. We've had no hurricane drought. There's been some very strong hurricanes, very strong typhoons across the region, but in both oceans, basically, the Eastern Pacific as well as the typhoons out in the Western Pacific, and then also in the areas around Australia and these kinds of places. But the Atlantic, of course, is what we focus on, and we all know what happened in 2011 with Hurricane Irene. So U.S. regional trends, thought I'd show you this, is kind of interesting. It's warming up across the United States, but there are certain areas that are not warming up. And it's interesting to note that the power structures for Washington, D.C. are in those particular areas that are not warming up. How convenient. Observed changes in frost-free season here. Note that in the west, the southwest, the Great Basin region, the Intermountain region of the west, the southern central Rockies, they're seeing temperatures going up, and so they're shortening their season. And of course, we're seeing the same thing, but it's not to the same degree. Well, we're going to kind of look at heavy precipitation trends because that's the situation, just like right now, right? Only it's not heavy, but.
Speak up, Roger, because the rain is loud.
Okay, I'm going to speak up a little bit. So, because of the rain, and we got light precipitation occurring right now, and it was kind of forecast to some of that to come through here, but I was thinking most of it would be to the south of us, so it's a little further to the north, but it's going to get out of town. And the crazy thing is that we're going to have the possibility of frost during the morning hours tomorrow morning, because skies are going to clear on out. We're going to get cold air advection that's already in place, and then we're going to clear on out. Radiational cooling is going to set in, and so that could set up a little bit of frost. Here's the trick though, because we're having a little bit of dampness, that may negate the frost, and we probably have a lot of fog in the morning, and that should keep the temperature, the dew point temperature up. So a little bit of weather forecasting as time goes on right now. Heavy precipitation trends. The green bars, again, this is the 1900s, there's the 2000s. You can see that it was going down in the 1920s and the 1930s when the Dust Bowl occurred. This is a kind of an average for the US, if you will. But note that the general trends are up. And there's a natural oscillation that takes place. And global climate change or anthropogenic global warming occurs, but there's always a background of natural variation that's taking place. Sometimes it gets masked, basically, the climate change portion of that, what carbon dioxide forces in the warming of the temperatures gets masked by, say, a La Nina or a lot of different cycles sort of coming together on a regional basis or on a global basis. So not all the time are we seeing direct linear warming. It has to go up and down. And same thing with precipitation trends. One year is going to be dry, the other year is going to be fairly heavy rain perhaps. We're seeing less and less moderation, less and less. So when it rains, our water droplets are bigger because we have a lot more moisture in the atmosphere, and that's due to a function of physics because of the warming climate that we have. You warm the temperature, it holds more moisture. It's just a common physics. But the other thing that's happening is our jet stream is changing, and it's getting locked in a position at times that's forcing a lot of precipitation to fall over one particular area, or like California is experiencing with all the fires they're seeing, they're not getting the precipitation. They're having a ridge of higher pressure over that particular area, and they're getting the opposite function. So this is all producing tremendous variability, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So regional trends in heavy precipitation, note that it's not quite everywhere, but the United States and the Northeast is really up. I mean, if you average it all out, the Northeast is really coming up. And if anything, we're probably going to see our increase in precipitation to continue, but we'll probably have a year, now and then that's going to be extremely dry, and we're going to go from these sort of wild swings, if you will. Another way to look at it is increasing heavy precipitation. It's up 74% in the greater Northeast, which includes West Virginia, part of the Ohio Valley, and then Pennsylvania, and then northeast to Maine. And this is what we're seeing, and of course it affects that river right out there, the Mad River. It affects all our local streams, causes erosion, fluctuations, and of course the flora and the fauna, including the fish, the amphibians, and everything. Trends in flood magnitude, they're up. You can see that generally east of the Mississippi, or really east of the Rockies, we're seeing a lot of that take place right now. The biggest trends are with snowmelt in the Red River Valley and places like North Dakota and back over parts of Minnesota. They're seeing tremendous changes taking place in those areas, but we are too. We are seeing that trend going up, as I mentioned. So this is an average annual precipitation for the state of Vermont, and I'm going to kind of work you through this a little bit here. This is the Green Mountains, of course, Champlain Valley in the red here. So what is red? That's under 36 inches of rainfall. However, this baseline was taken 1961 to 1990, and since then we've had a definite shift in our climate. I think everybody would attest to that we're seeing a little bit of a shift here. It's already altered these averages upward some, and perhaps lowered them in other locations. So it depends on where you are. But note, the Mad River Valley is roughly this kind of yellow area, and right here we experience on general about 40 to 44 inches. So that's a pretty significant amount of rainfall, but there's other areas, of course, to the south of us that we experience more tropical moisture, so they have higher rainfall. But so when it rains down in there, it rains really hard, and then it might be sunny for day after day. Ours is a little more of a moderation kind of deal going on. But of course, the Green Mountains, they unload a lot of snow, and precipitation is obviously snow and rainfall. And so you can see where the big areas are. Mount Mansfield, Lincoln Peak, it looks like Camel's Hump, Lincoln Peak, and so forth. And southern Vermont is a big rain-producing area right here for the Green Mountains. But note the hole that's kind of in the process right in the middle of Washington County, for example, right around the Barre-Montpelier area. So if you have a station like Montpelier Airport, it really doesn't represent what we're seeing in the Green Mountains, obviously, because of the orographic effects of the mountains, the terrain-induced flow that causes extra precipitation. So this is the kind of trend of what we've been seeing here, and it's fairly significant for us here in the Northeast United States, and especially Vermont and New England. This is going up. You can see the trend. This is 1910, this is 2010, and then I think this goes to about 2013. So you can see these trends. You get the typical oscillation, but we're looking at these temperatures, or these amounts of rainfall definitely on the increase. And what this is the percentage of extremes in a one-day precipitation. So yeah, things are going up. Change in annual precipitation, this is at the Burlington International Airport from 1941 to 2013. And you can see there's a definite trend there. This is 1941, 2013. A lot of variability, but if you average it all out, we're definitely seeing an increase in precipitation. What about the numbers of days per year with greater than 1 inch of precipitation? This again is at Burlington. So this means, you might consider heavy thunderstorms or larger storms that drop more than 1 inch amount precip. It could be snow, wet snow, dry snow. If it drops more than 1 inch, this is the measurement. 1880, 2020, you can see where we are right about 2016, 2017, and so forth. This is definitely going up.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. That's about perfect.
Great.
So occurrence for high flows, this is, guess where? Mad River. You can see that 10 more days, yes, this is correct. 10 more days of per year of high flow conditions from 30 to 40 per year, with a projection by 2100 of an 80% increase. If that's the case, right here may be a floodplain that nobody can be in by 2100 with the current rate of carbon dioxide being ejected into the atmosphere. Changes in the date of the first and last freeze dates. This is kind of interesting. So what we have here is, this looks like April 14th and so forth to May 26th. So you can see that the last freeze is occurring earlier. And the first freeze, well, witnessed this year, right? The first freeze is occurring definitely later. So we're having a shortening season of freezing temperatures, and what does that affect? That might be great for our gardens and whatnot and growing food, but it's not so good for our snow season. Joe's Pond ice out records, about 7 days earlier since the mid-1980s, and there's the trends. It's a little bit of a weird, trending here, but you can see the definite trends that are taking place. Lake Champlain freeze updates. I thought I'd throw this in here too. Want you to note that, see the diamond? No reported freeze, no freezing of Lake Champlain at all. Look at this. It used to always freeze, except on occasion, 1841 or whatever right here. Look at all the diamonds now. By proxy, you can see a warmer temperature. The mean temperatures are going up. Macintosh apples. The full bloom date at the Allen Home Farm that's in South Hero, Vermont, you can see that the bloom dates are about 7 days earlier. These are factors that are also affecting right here in the Mad River Valley, Washington County, and Greater Vermont, and the Northeast, and pretty much all of the northern tier of the country. Growing season, this is from the National Weather Service. It's a little complicated, but the dark blue is 1963 to 72. It ends with 2003 to 2012. You can see a trend with all these different stations, Barre Montpelier, Burlington, Cavendish, and so forth. Find your area here, you can see that everybody's climate is definitely shifting. Now, 2015 to 2040, a climate change sweet spot for those of us who love snow. Yes, it is true, the atmosphere holds more water. Provided we stay below 32, our snowstorms are going to get bigger. We're going to have more snow, but there's a big time caveat with that. Remember the start of 2015, 2016? What did I say about variability? So this is prior winters, extreme oscillations. We're looking at basically this winter, and you notice that this is atop Mount Mansfield, by the way. Atop Mount Mansfield, because they measure the snow depth every day, and these are the trends. Now this is last year, the 2015-2016 winter. You see how little it was. Look at the variability and then look at the averages. Averages are just two values and then added together divided by 2. But when you have 50, 60 years of data, you start to develop a really good average, and what we're seeing is these incredible wide swings. So winter recreation employment, well, look at this. Jobs in the thousands, greater than 24,000. Look at this area, or 12 to 24. Colorado's #1, obviously, their ski economy, tourist economy, and so forth. But the Northeast United States is right there. I don't know why they don't have New Hampshire and Maine in that. It's interesting to note that, but that's what that's the data right there. CO2 emission projections on the way up to 2100. Where are we? We're somewhere on this line or this dashed line, which is closer to business as usual. And of course, we all know the politics and who controls Washington, D.C., and who the donors are and who the lobbyists are, who basically represent them and not really us. Projected temperature increase, 2100, emission, the lower emission rate or the higher emission rate. Right now we're leaning toward this. And projected precipitation by season, you can see that our precipitation is going to increase during the winter. That might bode well for better skiing, but it's going to dry out in the summer and fall. What did we just have? We had a very dry end of the summer and into the fall. So recent extreme weather occurrences, I'm just going to go through these really fast. California drought is back, by the way. Talk to the people whose houses just burnt down. Then we had Hurricane Sandy. It caused snow. So extreme weather events are on the rise. Remember 2 winters ago we had this. This is very cold temperatures, very warm temperatures. We had a ridge of higher pressure here. The jet stream was cross-polar flow coming right out of Siberia. Boom, we had tremendous snows. And what did we get? Boston broke all their records for the month of February. Tremendous amounts of snow. Could happen again. Could be this year, by the way. Problems with winter warming. Fruit trees blossom too early, increase in pollen, more insects, and less snow for irrigation and winter businesses. That's mostly a western effect, namely California. but that still has some effect here. A new normal, what's going on? Increased evidence has linked extreme weather to the loss of Arctic sea ice. There's a lot of research on this, and we're seeing a slowing of the jet stream, which stays in one spot and causes storm after storm. Witnessed Boston with that tremendous amount of rainfall. And I'm getting close to the end here, but extreme weather and climate-related events are on the rise. This is an insurance company called Munich Re, which insures the insurance companies. They're seeing drastic payouts. Why? It's not due to tsunamis. It's not due to volcanoes or earthquakes or meteor impacts. It's all about the atmosphere. That's what's changing. That's what's causing catastrophic issues for the insurance companies. You ask them about climate change, they'll tell you. Weather-related power outages increased dramatically in the 2000s. I work for Velco. I contract with Velco, and we're seeing tremendous amounts of increases in both wind, severe thunderstorms, microbursts, and of course freezing ice situations, and wet snow loading. Something we're going to see on the increase as our temperature rises. We're going to have that kind of snowfall that is on the coast of Massachusetts, rather than those good old-fashioned snowstorms of dry snow with like 30-to-1 ratios of snow that are real dry and powder. We're going to get that wet, sloppy sort of Sierra cement. Unfortunately, that's where we're headed because the temperature's rising. And last but not least, I put this out today, and the problem, these are basically SO2, which is sulfuric acid or sulfuric dioxide. And we know the sources of where these are happening. These are power companies, power plants that are causing these plumes. So needless to say, these are the pollution sources. So is there any good news? The only good news is we have a few people like him that have the money to do the kinds of things that might want to change this and get us off this drug addiction of oil and coal and to renewables. And of course, we're doing that around here. And of course, you folks who showed up tonight are definitely part of those people. This is Elon Musk, by the way. And he's got some very good ideas. So you can't put your faith in the government, at least controlled the way it is now. And I would even say the state is, kind of lip service, I hate to say. But I think this is where the action is going to be. And it's going to be provided by people like the Friends of the Mad River. That's the deal. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. You are hardy souls, and this is getting you ready for winter. The last month didn't, so we're ready to get that started. We're going to skip a little something we had planned and go straight to the last 10-15 minutes of presentation, and then we're going to have food and drink and perusing and talking with your neighbors and some guests. Yeah. As soon as we can find this.
Okay,
there we go.
You take over if you know where that, all right there. Yep.
Hey, Corrie.
How do I hit?
Is Roger going to be around if people do want to ask him questions one-on-one?
I will be hanging around.
Roger's going to be hanging around if you have questions during the dinner and the perusing phase. All right, great.
I got it. Here we go.
Perfect. All right, so we're here to talk tonight about a group's work and a group's findings that has been working for the last 2.5 years. They have started to call themselves the Ridge to River Task Force, and I wanted to introduce you to these folks before I go into too much detail. So, if you're in the room and you have been serving on the Ridge to River Task Force, please stand up and wave your hands frantically. Or semi-slowly, whichever. Okay, great. So the Ridge to River Task Force has membership from each of the valley or the Mad River watershed towns, so 5 towns, select boards and planning commissions, and other folks who are interested. They all have gold name tags on tonight with their names because they're gold star worthy. So if you have a question about Ridge to River, you can ask one of these folks. The task force has been supported by a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, a lot of funding. These folks are listed here. We've had consulting and researchers helping us. We've had some organizational partners, the Mad River Valley Planning District, the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, helping from the very beginning. Of course, Friends of the Mad River sort of in the leadership role. And we have some emerging collaborations. So everything I'm going to present to you tonight is the result of all these people's work on this task force and all of these partnerships and funders. And I need to mention High Meadows Fund, who has supported this work from the beginning, and it would not be possible without their support. Also the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the Vermont, which way do I move to stop it? This way? Okay. Okay. Oh, thank you. And the Vermont DEC for funding. Okay, so that's the part we're skipping. Take you back, a long time for some of us, to elementary school and the water cycle. Is it ringing a bell for anyone? All right, so, water falls like it's doing right now. It infiltrates into the ground. It sources the groundwater. It flows to the streams through the groundwater. Some of it runs off the surface. It's evaporated into the air. A lot of it is evapotranspirated, which is with the trees and their surfaces of the leaves. But unfortunately, with urbanization and paving and roofs and what we call impervious surfaces, that cycle is changing. And what's happening from a sort of big picture perspective is that the more of that impervious surface that we have, the less groundwater, the less water that's being able to infiltrate, because water cannot go through pavement. It can't go through roofs. It has less of an easy time going even through a lawn surface that's been sort of compacted through the years than it does just a natural forest habitat. The other thing that's happening is that there's more runoff. So the water is running across that parking lot really quickly. It's entering our streams really quickly. So the reason that this is happening is that we've had this long-time mindset of sort of pave it, pipe it, pump it. So let's put some infrastructure in the ground that happens to be these pipes and this pavement, and it's what we call gray infrastructure. And let's get the water off of our property as soon as possible. That's sort of been our long-time mindset. And dealing with lots and lots of impervious surfaces, we want the water away as fast as possible because it's a problem, it's trouble. What problems that arise because of this is that we end up with more runoff than groundwater filling our streams, and it fills them very quickly, so it has a very erosive power. So that water is filling the streams fast, and it's coming with a lot of power to take out banks and to fill the stream with that sediment that's on the banks. It's also taking dirtier water to the streams because it hasn't infiltrated through the ground, and it's running off parking lots that aren't very clean. So I don't know if you noticed that I've added the word more to the more urban water cycle, because this certainly isn't a picture of the Mad River Valley. It is a picture of a very urban landscape, but this same thing is happening in our valley to a less huge magnitude. We have parking lots, we have lawns, we have lots and lots of drives and roads. And the realities of climate change, like Roger was just talking about, are driving some of this home, some of the sort of challenge of the way that we've been thinking about this, the way our mindset has been with regard to getting water as quickly off of our properties as possible. We end up with problems because water is moving too quickly and it's dirty. So there's an emerging mindset that's all about slowing water down, sinking it into the ground, and spreading it across the landscape instead of directly to the stream as quickly as possible. So the thinking here is if you can think about the land as a sponge, and I took this, you can't read this image, even those folks in the front of the room can't read this image because it's in Chinese. So your eyes are not that bad. But there are even cities in China that are calling themselves sponge cities because they're trying to really embrace this idea of soaking in their water and really living with the water and letting it go into the ground and not seeing it as something that needs to escape their property as soon as possible. So this is about porosity, it's about permeability, it's about soft engineering and green infrastructure. So why this matters is basically what we've just said, is if we can slow the water down when it's snow or rainwater before it gets into the stream and sink it into the ground, we are less vulnerable in larger rain events, like those pictures I just showed with regard to the culverts being blown out and other road erosion. We have fewer infrastructure maintenance costs, and we benefit from cleaner water, so we don't end up with that dirty water. There are lots and lots of benefits to this new mindset of thinking about water. So a very quick overview of Ridge to Rivers process is they had this in mind 2 years ago at the High Meadows, the Leahy Environmental Summit of 2015, when the organizers of the Leahy Summit said, what do you need to do in the Mad River Valley and elsewhere across the state to become more resilient? What is it that you need to do? And a group of 20 people from the Mad River Valley went to this summit and said, you know, if we can address stormwater runoff, we are 10 times sort of further along our steps towards resilience. That's where we're at now. We've done a lot of things for resilience, and we need to really try to tackle stormwater runoff. We got a grant from the High Meadows Fund that enabled us to continue that conversation and dialogue. We have done a lot of thinking and hired a lot of specialists who know a lot. We have reached out to this community and asked people what they care about, what they know about, what's important to them. And like I said, the group began calling itself Ridge to River, this task force and this initiative. So tonight we're going to talk about what we learned, what we know now, why it matters, and when we break out into the rest of the room to the stations, we're going to talk about what we can do. So there's a lot of experts around the room who have ideas about what we can do to help. So I'm going to tell you about what we know, what we learned in this 2.5 years. We have 437 miles of roads in the Mad River watershed. And that may not sound like a lot, but 290 of them are public, maintained by the V-Trans and by towns, and 147 of them are privately owned. So of the privately owned roads, 40% of them are on steep, very steep slopes. So that's because they're up in the hills. A lot of people have very steep roads in their own management. And in the Mad River Valley, believe this or not, our roads have very high road densities. At least half of our sub-watersheds have densities that are equivalent to some of the towns in Chittenden County. So we're dealing with a lot of roads on a lot of steep surfaces. And I think we all know that, but it's hard, we don't often think about it in these terms. So, why this matters. Runoff causes maintenance issues on these roads. It's expensive to deal with it over and over and over again. Roads act as fast routes to the streams, and they often carry very dirty water with them. With regard to private roads and driveways, they are very often, like I said, on very steep, in the steepest parts of the watershed. They have very few construction standards and no maintenance standards because they're in private ownership. There's nobody telling you how you need to manage your driveway. So oftentimes we end up with a lot of erosion and runoff. Oh, that was quick. So that was roads. But trails are another kind of road, and we have a lot of trails here, and we love the outdoors, and we love getting out in the outdoors, and that is great, and it's a wonderful thing about this place. And we have over 300 managed trails by various groups in the valley. Many miles are not managed by any groups, like the ones in the backyard that have been there forever that used to be logging roads. And if these trails are poorly sited, if they're poorly, they hadn't been well built, or if they're not maintained, there are often very big problems with regard to runoff into the streams, in the same way that the roads can be. Another thing that we learned that sort of blew our minds on this task force is that we have lost 500 acres of forest cover in this valley between 2001 and 2011. Let that sink in a little. 500 acres, and that's not all 500 of those acres became developed land. 34 acres became developed land, and 460 became sort of downgraded from forest to herbaceous shrubland. We don't have the data that we have doesn't tell us about why that is or what's happening. It's just a classification change from treed forested land to herbaceous or developed land. So like I said, 500 acres in those years. Why does this matter? Essentially, like I said before, forests soak up water and they build soil, and the soil holds water. So forests are one of the biggest things that you can do to be resilient. You can have forests that make you more resilient. There are studies out of the Pacific Northwest that show that watersheds that have under 65% forest cover are really vulnerable downstream to a really erosive stream banks. There are lots of problems downstream when the forest threshold becomes under 65%. And we have 3 subwatersheds in the Mad River Valley that are already under that 65%. 2 are directly into the Mad River, and 1 is the Rice Brook subwatershed. We have a handful of others that are close, 5 or 6 that are in the 65 to 75% threshold. So if that forest loss continues, we're on that threshold for a lot more of these subwatersheds. So another thing that we learned is that minor land disturbances can really have a major impact. And we talked to a lot of people like foresters and farmers and zoning administrators and development review boards and people who are out there on the land and seeing different things. And they're saying that minor disturbing activities, like in people's backyards, are adding up collectively across the landscape to be a pretty big deal. And these are things like a driveway culvert replacement, or maybe not replacing a driveway culvert and using one that's too small and constantly causing erosion. Clearing for a view is a common thing. Residential soil disturbance, so just, that person on their backhoe that really loves that backhoe. I think we've all seen that. We've maybe all been a part of that. And backyard quasi-forestry, so people who are kind of managing their backyards in a way that's not full tree cover. So these things can have a big impact across the landscape, and that really matters when you think about acres coming together with 500 lost acres of forest. What we also learned is that most Mad River Valley development is falling under state permitting thresholds. So here we have development that's 1 and 2 family structures, and the state permitting stormwater thresholds really aren't capturing that kind of development, so that the development isn't subject to those standards. Also, locally, there's really good regulation with regard to erosion control on a construction site. But thinking about the long-term management of the runoff that's caused by the new impervious surface, it's not really addressed by some of our local zoning. So that's a sort of a long-term, as more and more roads, as more and more lawns, as more and more roofs come about, we're not really managing that runoff in those situations. And then there's the enforcement challenge. There's you can have really great regulations that tell people how they should behave, but these folks that are in our towns trying to enforce these laws are often part-time positions, volunteer positions, with not the bandwidth, the time able to invest in conducting development reviews, enforcing regulatory documents, making sure all of the community is involved in the decisions. They do a great job, but they have a really lot on their shoulders. So they have even, when we interviewed those folks, they've said that they could benefit from some training and from some learning and from some sort of support. So the good news, like Roger, I'll say, here's the good news, is that we care in the Mad River Valley. We did a survey, and 100% of the people said they care about clean water, and we realized those are the people that filled out the survey. We know. But nonetheless, 100%. And 97% say that managing stormwater protects their quality of life. They see that connection between stormwater runoff and our quality of life here in the Mad River Valley. Many people are aware, they're taking action. 85% of people say that they have taken some action to prevent and minimize erosion. But basically what they've said is that their action is limited by resources and by skills. And they've asked for resources and skills. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're here tonight. And this next picture is Joshua Schwartz's daughter. This is the moral of the story, basically. Small collective actions can cause a lot of harm collectively across the landscape, but small collective actions that are good collective actions can really pull together and make a change. So the rest of the evening is meant for you to be able to explore different stations, and I have here, the action stations, what ideas about what we can do, and the folks with the the gold, not yellow, gold star, name tags, are manning these and womaning these stations, and they have over here with Harwood students and teachers, they have more information about sub-watershed data. So if you're interested in which sub-watersheds have some of the problems, which ones you live in, if you don't even know what sub-watershed you live in, maybe you can go over here and check that station out. Behind them is the town planning station. So these are not in order. I had no idea where they were going to be when I made the slide. So the Ridge to River Planning Commission representatives are back there to talk to you about anything that's of interest with regard to town planning. Right here is the home site station. So we have Andres Terizo, David Bryn, and Aaron Locker over here to talk ideas about how to build soil, how to protect forests, how to implement green stormwater infrastructure at your home site. Behind that is the trail site where Margot Wade and Ned Farquhar and maybe Peter, if he's here, Peter Geyer, are back there to talk about different trail management and see what you're interested in with regard to trails. And behind that is the town roads, I can't see, with the Ridge to River Select Board reps who've been working with road roundtables with the whole road crew foreman. And then beyond that is Richard Chaplinsky, who's dealing with private driveways. So if you have questions about your private driveways, he's the one to see. We're calling him Dr. Dirt or Dr. Driveway or... so I think what we're going to try to do is manage the dinner and the food and the stations at the same time. So maybe if you can if you're not starving to death and you could let somebody who is go ahead in line first, that would be great. And we can move the chairs around, do what you want with the room basically. The flatbread is counting, we're going to pay the bill tonight by the number of plates you use. So be sure to not use more than one, all right? That would be great. And if you would like to support the cost and offset the cost of the meal, we're happy to take donations. There are SAP buckets around, and we suggest $10 for dinner, but it's fine if you don't want to pay. That's great. Thank you to Flatbread, to Helen, to Clay, who helped on the back end, and to George, and to all the folks who are here tonight. And who else am I? And join Friends of the Mad River. Right. We would love to have you all as members of Friends of the Mad River. Thank you so much for coming. I look forward to any questions you have in a one-on-one situation beyond this so that everybody can go eat and put their coats on and warm up. Thank you.